Zainab Adiwale was 17, but she felt like a prisoner in her own life. Banana Island, Lagos, was a world of luxury, towering mansions, sleek cars with tinted windows, and the scent of imported perfume lingering in the air. From the outside, her life seemed perfect. She lived in a sprawling white mansion with glass walls that reflected the rising sun, a house so grand that visitors often gasped upon entering. Expensive chandeliers dangled from high ceilings, and marble floors gleamed so brightly that her reflection followed her wherever she walked. Servants moved like shadows, obeying every command before she even spoke, yet, for all the wealth surrounding her, Zainab felt empty. Her father, Chief Adiwale, was one of the most powerful oil tycoons in Nigeria. He was a man who built his empire with his own hands, but at the cost of time he never had for her. When he was home, he was either locked in his office taking endless calls or traveling from one business meeting to another. Her mother, Madam Bisi, was a famous socialite, gracing magazines and social events with a dazzling smile that hid the fact that she barely knew her own daughter. Zainab's room was filled with designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and the latest gadgets, but none of them filled the aching loneliness in her chest. Her parents gave her everything except the one thing she truly wanted, their presence. She tried to tell them once. She sat across from her mother at the long dining table, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of her. "Mama, can we talk?" she had asked. Her mother, scrolling through her phone, barely looked up. What is it, dear? I don't want to go back to Royal Crest High School. I want to transfer to a public school." Madam Bisi finally put her phone down, her perfectly arched brows lifting in disbelief. "What nonsense are you saying, Zainab? Why would you want to leave the best school in the country?" Zainab said, "Because I want to experience real life. I want to be around normal people, not just the children of billionaires." A strained silence filled the air before her mother scoffed. "This is not some movie, my dear. We worked hard so you don't have to struggle. You don't belong in a place like that." But Zainab didn't back down. "Maybe that's the problem. I don't belong anywhere," her mother sighed, shaking her head as if Zainab were simply going through a phase. "Fine. Do what you want. But don't come running back when you regret it." For the first time in years, Zainab felt excitement bubbling inside her. She imagined stepping into a world where people weren't fake, where friendships weren't built on status and money, and where freedom was the norm. She had no idea what awaited her. The first day at Surulere High School was nothing like she had imagined. Her driver, Baba Salizu, pulled up in front of the school in a sleek black Mercedes, its windows reflecting the curious faces of students standing outside. The moment she stepped out, the air seemed to shift. Conversations died down. Eyes locked onto her, Zainab could feel their stares burning into her skin. Some whispered. Others outright gawked. She adjusted the strap of her expensive Chanel backpack, suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The gold bracelet on her wrist, the perfectly pressed uniform, even the scent of her imported vanilla perfume, everything about her screamed wealth. And in this school, wealth was not an advantage. As she walked through the hallway, students parted like the Red Sea, but not out of respect, out of something else. Envy, judgment, even hatred. "No. See this one, stepping in like she owns the place," a girl muttered, loud enough for Zainab to hear. "Look at her shoes. Those alone fit pay my mama's rent," another voice laughed. A boy with a scruffy uniform and a mischievous grin blocked her path. "Princess, are you lost? Royal Crest is on the other side of town." Zainab forced a smile. "No, I'm exactly where I want to be," he laughed, nudging his friend beside him. "See as she day form humble. Make we help carry her gold bag before her hand pain em." Before she could respond, someone stepped between them. "Ope, leave her alone," a girl said. She was tall, with deep brown skin and sharp eyes that seemed to see straight into Zainab's soul. The boy, Ope, shrugged. "Na she bring Warala come. We no ask 'em to join us poor people." The girl turned to Zainab. "My name is Timmy. You should be careful around here. Not everyone is nice to strangers, especially ones like you." "Ones like me?" Zainab asked. Timmy smirked. "Rich girls who think they can play normal." Zainab wanted to argue, to say she wasn't playing, that she truly wanted to be here. But what was the point? They had already made up their minds about her. The day didn't get any easier. In class, she sat alone. No one wanted to talk to her, except to whisper about her behind her back. During lunch, when she tried to sit at a table, the students quickly moved their trays away as if she carried a disease. She wasn't welcome. By the end of the day, her excitement had turned into exhaustion. When Baba Salisu pulled up at the school gate, she barely had the energy to climb into the car. "How was your first day, small madam?" the old driver asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Zainab sighed. "It was different," Baba Salisu chuckled. "Different good or different bad?" She stared out the window at the bustling streets of Suryalia, the hawkers, the buses filled beyond capacity, the children playing football in narrow alleys. It was a world so different from the golden cage she had grown up in. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But I'm not giving up." She had wanted real life. Now she had it. The question was, could she survive it? The next morning, Zainab walked into the school compound, adjusting the straps of her backpack. The usual murmurs followed her, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and resentment. She had tried to ignore it in the beginning, but now, it clung to her like a shadow. Today would be different, she told herself. Today, she would prove to them that she was just like everyone else. She approached the school's outdoor water tap, her throat dry from the Lagos heat. A group of students sat nearby, whispering as she bent down to turn the knob. But the moment the first drop of water trickled out, gasps erupted behind her. The water, usually clear, was now a thick, muddy brown, Zainab recalled in shock. "What, see? I told you," a boy named Timmy whispered loudly to his friends. "Since she came here, strange things keep happening. It's just a coincidence," Zainab muttered, but her words felt empty even to herself. The other students didn't say anything, but their eyes spoke volumes. A few of them stepped away, as if her presence alone could taint them. Shaking off the unease, she walked towards the school gate, where her driver, Baba Salisu, usually waited to pick her up. But before she could reach him, an old beggar sitting near the entrance caught her attention. His eyes, milky with age, locked onto her as he raised a bony finger. "You wear gold, but it carries a price. Beware, child. Beware." A chill ran down Zainab's spine. She glanced down at her wrist, where a delicate gold bracelet gleamed in the sun. A gift from her father on her 16th birthday. "What do you mean?" she asked hesitantly, but the beggar only shook his head, muttering words she couldn't understand. She turned back to Baba Salisu, expecting his usual warm smile, but today, his expression was different. There was something in his eyes. Fear? Discomfort? He quickly opened the car door and gestured for her to get in without a word. That night, Zainab lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She replayed the day's events over and over. The water turning muddy, the beggar's cryptic warning, the way Baba Salisu barely looked at her. Was it all really just coincidence? The next morning, she walked into the school's corridor, still deep in thought. She was so lost in her mind that she barely noticed the janitor, Mr. Depot, smiling at her as he mopped the floor. "Good morning, Miss Zainab," he greeted kindly. She smiled, grateful for his warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Depot." And then, right before her eyes, Mr. Depot gasped, clutching his chest. His eyes widened in shock, and he collapsed onto the floor. Screams filled the hallway. Teachers and students rushed to his side, but Zainab stood frozen. Her blood ran cold. "No, this couldn't be happening. This is getting weird," someone muttered. She greeted him, and then he collapsed. Another voice hissed, "It's her. She's bad luck." Zainab stumbled backward. "No, it's not. I didn't," but their expressions told her they didn't believe her. Even the teachers seemed uneasy as they escorted her away. At lunch, Zainab sat alone, poking at her food with her fork. The large cafeteria buzzed with chatter, but none of it included her. She wasn't surprised. Since arriving at Suryalia High School, she had become something of an anomaly, a girl too rich for the poor kids, but too out of place to fit in. The few students who had been civil toward her were now keeping their distance, as if associating with her might invite unwanted attention. As she stirred her jollof rice, she noticed a girl at a nearby table stealing glances at her tray. The girl's eyes lingered on the untouched grilled chicken, her expression betraying hunger. Zainab hesitated for only a moment before sliding her tray toward her. "You can have it if you want. I'm not really hungry." The girl's eyes widened in shock. Then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. She pushed the tray back toward Zainab with a scowl. "I don't need your pity," she muttered before turning away. A few students at the table smirked, shaking their heads as if confirming something they already believed about her. Zainab sighed, pushing her food away entirely. No matter what she did, it always seemed to be the wrong thing. She had only wanted to be kind, to share, to be accepted. But instead, she had just given them more reason to resent her. The next day, just as classes ended, the sky darkened with an unexpected downpour. Students shrieked and scattered, rushing for cover beneath trees, doorways, or pulling out tattered umbrellas. Zainab stood near the entrance, clutching her bag against her chest, when she noticed a boy crouched near the school gate. He held a notebook over his head, but it was already soaked through. His uniform clung to his skin, and he shivered from the cold. Without thinking, Zainab shrugged off her designer jacket, an expensive, imported piece her mother had bought from Paris, and walked over to him. "Here, take this." The boy hesitated, looking from her to the jacket and back again. I'm fine." "You're freezing," Zainab insisted, pushing it into his hands. He finally took it, reluctantly slipping it on. For a brief moment, Zainab felt relief. Maybe this time her kindness wouldn't be mistaken for something else. But then, laughter rang out behind her. She turned to see Ope, the most outspoken girl in school, standing with a group of students. They watched her with amused expressions, whispering amongst themselves, "Maybe you should go back to Banana Island," Ope sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We were fine before you came." Zainab's stomach twisted. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to make friends." Ope scoffed. "Friends? You think you can buy us?" Zainab's fingers curled into fists. "I wasn't." "Oh please," Ope interrupted. "You rich people think money solves everything. First, you offer your fancy food, now your designer jacket. What's next? You flying us all to school in your private jet?" Laughter rippled through the crowd as Zainab's face burned. She had never felt so small. The boy who had taken her jacket hastily shrugged it off and handed it back. "Thanks," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. Then, he hurried away, as if just being associated with her would taint him. Zainab stood frozen, the jacket limp in her hands. The rain poured around her, drenching her uniform, but she barely noticed. By the next day, the whispers had grown louder. Students didn't just watch her, they examined her, picking apart everything she did, twisting it into something ugly. "She probably has servants feed her at home. That's why she doesn't eat here. Bet you she's never washed a plate in her life. She thinks we're charity cases. Just wait, next thing you know, she'll start handing out wads of cash." Every hallway she walked down felt narrower. Every classroom she entered felt suffocating. Even teachers glanced at her warily, as if she were a disturbance, an unwelcome presence they didn't know how to handle. No matter how much she tried to blend in, to be normal, she couldn't. They had already decided who she was before she even had the chance to show them. By lunchtime, she couldn't bear to sit in the cafeteria again. So she wandered outside instead. She found a quiet corner near the school garden and sat on the bench, hugging her knees to her chest. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, "You are an Adiwale. You must carry yourself with dignity." But what was dignity worth when no one saw you for who you really were? Baba Salizu, their longtime driver, had arrived to pick her up. Without a word, she grabbed her bag and hurried toward the waiting vehicle, ignoring the stares and hushed voices that followed her. Zainab leaned her head against the cool leather seat of the car, her fingers absently scrolling through her phone. Baba Salizu was quiet as usual, focusing on the road ahead. The streets of Ikoyi were nearly empty at this hour, save for a few late-night wanderers and the occasional car speeding past. She had convinced Baba Salizu to take her on a short drive to clear her mind. Ever since she transferred to Suryalia High, life had become strange, lonely, and filled with whispers she couldn't understand. As they neared their mansion in Banana Island, she sat up abruptly. A woman stood at the gate. Not just any woman, an old, frail figure wrapped in a deep red wrapper, her grey hair wild and unkempt. Her back was hunched, and her eyes, though dark and shadowed, seemed to burn with an intensity that made Zainab shiver. Baba Salizu saw her too. He let out a sharp breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Madam, we need to drive past. We shouldn't stop." Zainab ignored him. Her heart pounded with curiosity and fear as she lowered the car window slightly. The woman's lips barely moved, but her voice, raspy and haunting, carried into the car as though she were whispering directly into Zainab's ears. "Your wealth was bought with blood. And now, the debt is due." Zainab's stomach clenched. "What?" she whispered, but before she could say more, Baba Salizu stepped on the gas, sending the car speeding past the woman. "Why did you do that?" Zainab demanded, turning to look back, but the woman was gone. Baba Salizu's hands trembled on the wheel. "That woman. She's not ordinary, madam. She shouldn't be here." Zainab stared at him. She had never seen their driver afraid of anything before, but the way his knuckles had turned white told her he knew something she didn't. They pulled up to the mansion, and as Zainab stepped out, an icy wind blew past her, ruffling her hair. She shivered. Lagos nights were always warm. Where did that cold come from? The mansion's grand lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then, just as she placed her hand on the front door, a final flicker plunged the house into darkness. A scream rang out from inside. Zainab's heart lurched. "Mama?" She ran inside. Her mother, Madame Bisi, was kneeling beside Chief Adiwale, who lay sprawled on the floor, his body completely still. "Daddy?" Zainab gasped, falling to her knees beside him. "Daddy, wake up!" Chief Adiwale's eyes were open, but they were frozen in horror. His mouth trembled as though he wanted to speak. But no words came out. The family doctor arrived within minutes. After a brief examination, he stood up, his face pale. "There's no medical reason for this," he muttered. He's completely paralyzed." Madame Bisi clutched her chest, shaking her head. No, it can't be." Zainab's mind raced. The old woman. The warning, "Your wealth was bought with blood." She stood abruptly and stormed to her mother's bedroom, flinging open drawers, cabinets, and jewelry boxes, searching for anything that could explain what was happening. And then she found it, an old, black and white photograph. Zainab's breath hitched as she held it up to the dim light. It was her father, decades younger, dressed in a crisp white suit. Standing beside him was another man, a man whose face sent a jolt of horror through her body, the beggar outside her school. But that was impossible. The beggar was an old, frail man with wrinkled skin and hollowed eyes. Yet, in this picture, he looked the same. Not a day younger or older. A cold realization crept over her. The man hadn't aged. Her hands shook as she turned the photo over. Faint, almost fading words were scribbled in the corner. "The price must be paid." The room spun. Zainab clutched the photo to her chest as she pieced together the terrifying truth. Something had been done, something dark, and now it was coming to collect its due. Zainab sat in her room, staring at the old black and white photograph she had found hidden in her mother's jewelry box. Her fingers trembled as she traced the image of her father standing beside the mysterious old beggar. How was it possible that the same man who looked homeless and frail outside her school appeared unchanged in this decades-old picture? Her mind raced with questions, but there was only one person who could answer them, her mother. Determined, Zainab stormed downstairs, clutching the photograph tightly in her hand. She found her mother in the grand living room, lounging on a velvet sofa, scrolling through her phone. The chandelier above them sparkled, but the weight in Zainab's chest dulled the beauty of their luxurious home. "Mummy," Zainab said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I need to talk to you." Madame Bisi barely looked up. "Not now, Zainab. Can't you see I'm busy?" Zainab took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "I found this." She placed the photograph on the glass table in front of her mother. "Who is this man? And why does he look exactly like the beggar outside my school?" Madame Bisi's face lost all color. Her fingers froze on her phone, and her eyes darted to the photograph. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she muttered, "You should not have found that." Zainab felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean? Mummy, what aren't you telling me?" Her mother's hands trembled as she pushed the photograph away. "Drop it, Zainab. Some things are better left buried." "But I need to know." Zainab's voice cracked with desperation. "Ever since I transferred to that school, strange things have been happening to me. People think I'm cursed. The mansion, Daddy's paralysis, this isn't normal. And now, this photo? Tell me the truth." Madame Bisi's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in her life, Zainab saw fear in her mother's eyes. A deep, bone-chilling fear. But instead of answering, she shook her head and said in a warning tone, "Never ask about our wealth again, Zainab. Never." Tears of frustration burned in Zainab's eyes. "Why are you hiding this from me? Does Daddy know?" Her mother stood abruptly, her silk robe flowing behind her as she turned away. "This conversation is over." Zainab's hands balled into fists. She wasn't going to get the truth from her mother. But there was someone else who might tell her what she needed to know. Later that evening, Zainab sat quietly in the back seat of their luxury car as Baba Salizu drove her home from school. The old driver had worked for her family since before she was born. He was the only one who had looked uneasy the moment she started attending the public school. The way he avoided her eyes whenever she brought up the strange events. He knew something. Summoning courage, she spoke up. "Baba Salizu. Who is the old beggar outside my school?" The elderly driver tensed but kept his eyes on the road. "Ah, my dear. Why are you asking such things? I found a picture of him. With my father. Decades ago." She watched Baba Salizu's grip tighten on the steering wheel. "Tell me the truth." The car was silent for a long moment before Baba Salisu sighed heavily. Zainab, your father is a good man now, but in his youth, he and his friends sought riches beyond imagination. They were young, ambitious, and greedy. Zainab listened, her heartbeat quickening. They traveled deep into a remote village. There, they met a powerful seer, a man who could see into the past and future. Baba Salisu's voice dropped lower, as if he feared someone might hear. The seer promised them wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But wealth like that does not come for free. Zainab swallowed hard. What was the price? Baba Salisu's voice was thick with sorrow. Every firstborn child in their families would be cursed. Cursed to a life of loneliness, misfortune, and despair. A shiver ran through Zainab's spine. Her mind raced back to all the times she felt out of place, all the moments of isolation. It had never been about her being different or spoiled, it was something far worse. Something she had no control over. Did my father know? She whispered. Baba Salisu sighed again. I believe, deep down, he did. But he convinced himself it was just a story, a superstition. Until now. Zainab's hands shook as she clutched her skirt. So, I am paying the price for his greed? Baba Salisu's expression was pained. It seems so, my dear. Tears welled up in Zainab's eyes. Her entire life, she had felt alone. Now, she knew why. And worse, there was no way to undo it. As the car pulled into the mansion's driveway, Zainab felt an overwhelming weight on her chest. The truth was supposed to set her free. Instead, it shackled her with a curse she never asked for. Zainab sat on the floor of her now dimly lit bedroom, staring at the golden necklace in her trembling hands. It was a gift from her father on her 13th birthday, a symbol of their wealth, their status, their curse. Her heart pounded as she replayed the beggar's words in her mind. You can end this, child. But the price must be paid. Could she really do it? Could she give up everything, the luxury, the comfort, the security? A deep, unsettling silence filled the house, broken only by the sound of her father groaning from his hospital bed. Chief Adiwale had always been a powerful man, a lion among men, but now he was reduced to a shadow of himself, paralyzed and weak. Her mother, Madame Bisi, hadn't spoken since that night. Her once proud eyes were now hollow, distant, as if she had already resigned herself to whatever fate had in store for them. Zainab clenched the necklace tighter. Is it worth it? She whispered to herself. If I let this curse continue, I'll live in riches, but my children, they'll suffer, just like me. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about her childhood, growing up in a mansion filled with everything money could buy. But never love, never warmth. She thought about her days at the public school, where she had tried to find a sense of normalcy but was met with resentment and isolation. No matter where she went, the curse followed her like a shadow. A knock on the door startled her. It was Baba Salisu. Are you ready, child? His voice was gentle, yet firm. Zainab took a deep breath and nodded. She placed the necklace around her neck one last time, feeling its weight pressing down on her chest. Then, without another word, she followed Baba Salisu out of the house. The journey to the Ocean River felt like stepping into another world. The roads were dark, lit only by the headlights of Baba Salisu's old Peugeot. The air felt heavy, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Zainab's mind raced with doubts. What if this didn't work? What if she was making a terrible mistake? They arrived at the riverbank just before dawn. The beggar was already there, standing at the edge of the water, his tattered robe flowing in the breeze. You have chosen, he said without turning around. There is no turning back. Zainab swallowed hard. Her hands shook as she unclasped the necklace, the gold gleaming under the moonlight. The beggar gestured toward the river. Wash it in the sacred waters, he instructed. Let the river take what it is owed. Zainab stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the cold, wet sand. She knelt at the river's edge, her reflection staring back at her, a girl who had everything yet nothing at all. With one last deep breath, she plunged the necklace into the water. At first, nothing happened. Then, a sudden gust of wind howled through the trees, sending ripples across the river's surface. The water around the necklace darkened, swirling like ink. Zainab gasped as she felt a strange force pulling at her hands. The necklace grew heavier, burning her palms. She wanted to let go, but the beggar's voice echoed in her mind. You must see it through. Tears mixed with the river water as she scrubbed the necklace with trembling fingers. The gold began to fade, turning dull and lifeless. The wind roared louder, and for a moment, Zainab felt an unbearable weight lift from her chest, as if chains she hadn't even realized were there had been broken. and then silence. The wind stopped. The river stilled. The necklace, now nothing more than a tarnished piece of metal, slipped from her hands and disappeared beneath the water. It was over. The drive back to the mansion was eerily quiet. Zainab felt exhausted, drained, yet lighter than she had ever felt before. But the weight of her decision still loomed over her. What would happen now? She didn't have to wait long to find out. The moment they stepped inside the house, a loud crashing sound echoed from upstairs. Chief Adiwale. Madame Beese's scream sent shivers down Zainab's spine. She ran up the stairs, her heart pounding in her ears. The door to her father's bedroom was wide open. And there, standing beside the bed, was Chief Adiwale, fully awake, fully healed, his eyes wide with shock. What happened? He stammered, flexing his fingers, touching his legs as if to make sure they were real. Madame Beese sobbed, clutching him as though afraid he would disappear. Zainab felt a lump in her throat, relief and fear intertwining in her chest. The curse was broken, but then the phone rang. Madame Beese answered, and within seconds, her face turned ghostly pale. They took everything, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zainab's stomach twisted. What do you mean? The bank. Our accounts are frozen. The company. They seized our assets. The mansion. We have to leave. It was happening. Zainab clenched her fists. This was the price. This was the cost of freedom. Their wealth had vanished overnight, like a dream fading with the morning light. Madame Beese collapsed onto the bed, weeping. Chief Adiwale, still in shock, stared blankly at the wall. Zainab, however, did not cry. For the first time in her life, she felt free. The next morning, they left the mansion with nothing but a few bags and memories. Baba Salisu drove them away from Banana Island, away from the life they once knew. As they passed through the gates, Zainab looked out the window. The beggar was standing there, watching them. She met his gaze. He nodded once, and then, as if carried by the wind, he was gone. Zainab turned away, staring ahead at the road before them. For the first time, she had no idea where they were going, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had broken the curse. She had chosen freedom over fortune, and now, a new life awaited. Zainab sat on the edge of her tiny bed, staring at the peeling paint on the walls of their new apartment in Sorulea. The air smelled different, not of imported perfumes and marble-polished floors, but of life, raw, unfiltered, and real. There were no housemaids rushing around to serve breakfast, no security guards stationed at the gate, no fleet of luxury cars parked outside. The echoes of her old life had faded into a distant memory. Everything her family once owned, gone overnight. Her father, Chief Adiwale, had been discharged from the hospital miraculously healed, but the man who once commanded an empire now sat quietly in a plastic chair, lost in thought. Madame Beese, once the queen of Lagos high society, now struggled to adjust to life without designer bags and red carpet events. The wealth that once defined them had vanished, leaving only what truly mattered, themselves. Zainab's heart pounded as she walked to the window, looking down at the lively streets. Children played soccer barefoot on the dusty road. Women sold puff-puff and akara at the street corner, their voices rising in cheerful banter. Everything here was so different from Banana Island's cold perfection. Yet, for the first time in her life, she didn't feel empty. She didn't feel trapped. A soft knock on the door startled her. She hesitated before opening it. To her surprise, Ope and Timmy stood there, their usual sneers absent. "What do you want?" she asked cautiously, memories of their taunt still fresh in her mind. Ope shifted uncomfortably. "We heard what happened." Zainab raised an eyebrow. "And?" Timmy sighed. "Look, we were wrong about you. We thought you were just some spoiled rich girl who wanted to play poor for fun. But you gave up everything." Zainab crossed her arms. "I didn't have a choice." Ope shook her head. "No, you did. You could have kept your wealth and let the curse continue. But you chose to end it." A lump formed in Zainab's throat. She had expected pity. She had expected gossip. But she hadn't expected respect. Timmy grinned. "Come on, we're going to Maman Ketch's. Best jollof rice in Sorulea. Your first meal as an official Sweria girl is on us." Zainab laughed, a real, unforced laugh. Something warm spread through her chest. Acceptance. Friendship. The very thing she had once tried to buy but never truly had. She turned back toward the apartment, where her parents sat in silence. They were still struggling to adjust, but at least they had each other. She had lost money, but she had gained something priceless. She stepped out of the door, leaving behind the girl she used to be. For the first time, Zainab felt truly wealthy, Please subscribe to our channel for more interesting African folktales.